Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. On the last show, I introduced a story that is found in Afterlife Interrupted, Book 2, over my shoulder. That story is entitled Lucille, Calm Under Fire. Lucille was, I think, in her early 80s. She was widowed. She lived alone with her cats. She was asleep when she awakened during the night to find unusually bright colors out the window. At first, they were attractive, but it turned out that these colors that were so unusual were caused by a wildfire, and that she was in it, that was rampaging through her neighborhood. Today, we'll do the second of 3 podcasts on this story. This one is called Compassionate Response. So this story has circulated for several years. That book has been out for a while. And there's been time for people to read it or listen to it and send me a message, ask me a question or something, want some sort of response to a question that's come up in their mind because of having encountered this story. My experience is usually that people who bother to do that do so not just because of idle curiosity or intellectual curiosity, but usually because of some suffering of their own. Maybe they've been through something like that, or a loved one has died, and in this case, a wildfire. Anyway, I'm going to be replying to a few concerns that have been expressed to me, or things that somehow are topical because of this story. So the first one, it could be about any of the afterlife stories that I deal in, is simply what happens when people die. Well, when people die, there are some commonalities, like the stoppage of a heartbeat, uh, brain waves. You know how there's sometimes complexity, medical complexity about when the moment of death was, depending upon what measurement you're using. But eventually, everybody's heart stops, brain function ceases. In religious language, the soul separates from the body, or the consciousness separates from the body. I'm a member of IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and many people that nearly died have stories to tell of being outside of their body for a time and experiencing things without being connected to the 5 senses of the body. So there are some things that are certainly common to dying that everybody would take part in, and then not. For example, when a lot of people die in the same event, do they have the same experience? I think the experiences that people can have as they are dying and just after their deaths, then what happens after that can be as varied as people are. That's part of why I chose to tell Lucille's story at all, is because I thought, on the one hand, she died in her home because of a fire, but she went about it so extraordinarily that I thought her story was worthy of our full attention. So in any event, how did Lucille die? Well, she described being an older woman, waking in the night, realizing that she was in a wildfire, and then, instead of running about the house like a crazy woman, she said, which would have only served to scare the cats, she stayed in the present moment, which is extraordinary when she was awakened from sleep to begin with. But somehow she had the capacity to stay in the present moment and pay attention and to choose freely what she did. I really love that about her. She didn't just default to some panicky response. She paused to gather her wits, assess the circumstance that she was in, form the thought of at least one option, which was flight, which, why wouldn't that be one of the things you think of when you're being surrounded by a fire? Run, run, run. Well, she quickly got rid of that idea because she said I was an old woman in house slippers and a nightwear. She didn't like her chances on the driveway in a wildfire. Had I been a younger woman, she said I might have grabbed the car keys, grabbed up the cats, and made a run for it. Well, my point is she calculated. She didn't default to a fear. She stayed in the present moment. She assessed possibilities, and she chose the one that she thought was most suitable. That was to simply gather up her loved ones, her cats, and to sit in her chair with her cats and see how this goes. She had hoped that maybe it would skip over the way that she had seen news coverage of fire disasters or tornadoes where there's widespread damage, but one house was spared. She held out hope that maybe it could play out that way. She also told us that she didn't burn. She doesn't remember the smell of smoke. She just went unconscious and wondered if it was because the oxygen was all gone from the air she was breathing. She wondered about the physics of being inside a wildfire and could the oxygen disappear before you got burned or had smoke inhalation. Anyway, her experience of it was just that, was to gather up her cats and see, let's wait this out. Well, one thing she did that I admire is even though she was the only human person in the house, she didn't think of herself as utterly alone. She thought of herself and her cats in the plural. I like that because I think as individual and as alone as we might sometimes think we are, I think we're always a part of the greater whole. And when we conceive of ourselves as part of the greater whole, some of our fantastic fears about me and what's going to happen to me, it's not that they disappear, they just get contextualized differently. And she chose to be of service to her pets. She gathered them up and had compassion on these animals that were going through the same frightening experience that she was. But she was, I don't know, could you call her the adult in the room? The one who kept her head, kept calm, and made a rational choice. I love that about her. Now, it's true, she did end up dying in a wildfire. It didn't go the way she might have preferred. But afterwards, she was also able to say, well, I was anticipating my death because I was in advanced age. I wondered if it would be by cancer or heart attack or whether I would have to go through the indignities of being bedridden and such. In the end, she was able to say to us, well, I would have died of something, and it turns out that I died in a wildfire. After a while, she used the word footnote. She said, after a while, the story of your death will be a footnote. Well, that could be a really valuable lesson to take away from this. If I'm afraid of some certain kind of dying, well, it will eventually be a historical footnote. Anyway, maybe I just think that way. Maybe I'm different than you. I don't know. But I admire the way that she just kept her wits about her and stayed in the present moment. She could have anticipated all kind of fearsome things in that circumstance, but she just didn't choose to focus on fear. She chose to focus on her cats and on making a decision to be together and be still and see how this goes. Well, I want some of what you got, Lucille, because I haven't been in a wildfire, but sometimes I'll get these little panic pictures in my head of, oh my God, the sky's falling, or what's going to become of me, and so on. And I really admire your capacity to just stay in the moment, make the best decision that there is to be made, even if the options are not very good, as was true in your case. But I believe that's an important lesson. Now, her neighborhood burned up. She didn't go on. I don't think she knew how many people died. She just knew that it was that this event was not confined to her solitary home. It was something happening through the neighborhood. She even thought back and said, well, at least I didn't have it as bad as others, in that I wasn't leaving small children or whatever. And uh, but my point here is that when a lot of people die in the same event, they don't necessarily have to experience it the same way. I don't think everybody else in the neighborhood would have been as calm as Lucille was, but she certainly was that, and we can be that if we choose to. You can ask her help. Well, how does one stay in the present moment? Does that sound like a ridiculous question? Well, we're all in the present moment, but the present moment only lasts an instant, and then it becomes the past, and then a future moment becomes the present moment. For people that pay attention to consciousness and to the way their thoughts are formed, staying in the present moment can be easier said than done. I, for example, am a person who is activated by, and my imagination likes to think of the future. I like to make plans, and I usually have a number of different things that I'm planning to do. I tend to load my plate. I like to have a lot of things that I'm working on, and rarely have moments where I might say, as I did when I was a child, there's nothing to do. Boy, did my parents hate to hear that. And you learn not to even say it out loud. If ever you verbalize there's nothing to do, oh yes, there is. You can go out and clean up that garage, or you can go sort your sock drawers, do some unpleasant thing. There's always something that they had in mind to do, that if you dared say you were bored or didn't have anything to do. Well, that's not been my issue for most of my life anyway. I have lots to do, mostly because I keep dreaming up future things that I'd like to make actual. But Lucille had a great gift for being in the present moment. She didn't look, even after having died in a fire. Well, first of all, remember, she told us that she didn't experience being burned. She said, I wasn't in my body by the time that happened. My body did, in fact, burn, but I wasn't in it. That's one of the reasons that this work and sharing it with you is so important to me, because a lot of us do deal with the abrupt, violent, apparently painful deaths of people we love. And some of what I've heard in these stories is that, well, yes, I understand why you would think that way, but in fact, I wasn't in my body when it burned. Well, I've heard that a lot, that a lot of people that had traumatic, violent deaths were sometimes pulled out of it by their guardian angel. Now, she didn't mention a guardian angel. All she mentioned was her state of consciousness, that she sat in the chair with the cats. The next thing she can remember was darkness. And then I don't know if she used the word awakening or not, but then being aware that she was in another place and that she had died, but that she was safe. Well, I hope that gives comfort to people who are grieving that difficult kind of a loss. For me, staying in the present moment and not one thing she didn't do was blame anybody. And that's moving into the past and saying, well, if in the past this or that person had done this or that thing or done their job better, I'd still be alive. And some of the people that I've dealt with, that's the thing that troubles them most. They have some anger toward someone else, sometimes someone who took their life, someone whose carelessness caused their life, sometimes God, and they'll get tied up in knots about the past event of their sudden death and how someone must be held responsible for it. I'm going to be angry about it until they're brought to justice or something like that. Well, she just didn't do that. She just didn't. And I don't want to be that way either. When bad things happen, I don't necessarily want to find the culprit or scapegoat someone or blame God. I just want to try to be at peace. Easier said than done, but that's a choice that I keep making. Staying in the present moment one of the things that I do, I belong to a semi-contemplative Catholic religious order, and we have structured prayers, throughout the day. But one of the things that I try to do in the morning is have quiet. And sometimes it's explicit contemplation where I set the timer on my phone to conscribe the time, and then sit in stillness and do some breathing work. Or one thing that I like to do is just imagine, the only thing I imagine in pictorial terms is a river in front of me, that my whole consciousness is nothing but a river flowing from side to side, that I'm on the bank of it, observing it. And then when I become aware that I'm not still because I just had a thought about a snack, I have appetites, but I'm not my appetite, and I let the snack fall in the river, go away. I think of a task. As soon as I'm finished with my contemplation, I'm going to I might think of a task that I need to do when I'm finished here. Well, I have tasks, but I'm not my task. I'm gonna let the task float away. So that's a simple little exercise to do in contemplation. It's not really talking to God, it's just being still. That might include the idea of God's presence in me as a still, quiet presence. It doesn't have to be theistic. It can just be sitting still. That's enough. But if I start the day with some contemplative period of time, even a few minutes, I can begin to live in the present moment, ask in prayer for the present gift to meet the present challenge. In Christian terms, it's give us this day our daily bread, asking for what I need today, not asking for a bakery or a load of bread. All I need is the bread I need for now, for this day. I just think Lucille had that in spades. I don't know. We don't know very much more about her. We only have this one or a couple of little snippets, but somehow she must have cultivated that in her life, don't you think, in order to be that way in such a trying moment at the end? She stayed in the present moment. One of the things that St. Thomas Aquinas taught is that sometimes the present duty involves paying attention to a future promise. I've lived in academic ministry most of my life, and when you enroll in an academic program, it's with a goal that's future oriented, to get this degree or this competency that might move into an occupation. But it always breaks down into tasks that need to be done today. You don't need to be worried about the big picture all the time. You can just say, no, today's duty is to do these things, some of which are on my agenda because they move me toward a future goal. So that's that discipline of trying to stay in the present moment. C.S. Lewis calls that the moment that's most like God, because God lives outside of time and created time, and that God consciousness is eternal and timeless. Well, my being resonates with that, and I feel really most myself and most true somehow when I'm being still and living in the present moment. So then the other question that has come up from this story probably won't surprise you. I've heard it several times. Father Nathan, what about the cats? Well, a lot of us love an animal, love pets. And the truth of the matter is, Lucille only told us that she gathered them to herself and they huddled together in that frightening moment. After that, she didn't mention them. So one question that arises is, okay, Lucille, have you seen your cats since then? She didn't say. That's just kind of the nature of human conversation. Not everything comes up. Sometimes we walk away from a conversation with someone that we might have enjoyed and say, darn it, I wish I would have asked her about X. Next time I see him, I'm going to bring up Y. Well, anyway, she didn't talk about what happened to the cats, or has she seen her cats in the afterlife? But it's a legitimate question and one that's been asked a lot. I remember being in first grade in Catholic school in 1962, 3. Well, it had been 62 in the first grade. And that question was a question that children asked because most of us had pets that we loved. Uh, well, when I die, will I be with my dog or my cat? I remember being taught in first grade that, well, the reason we had to ask the question at all is because one of the ways that at least the Catholic Church answers that is no, that you have to have free will, and the angels and the humans have that, but none of the other animals have that. They have instinctual behaviors, but they wouldn't be able to choose between good and evil, and they wouldn't be able to choose to be in the presence of God. Well, okay, that's part of the tradition. But I also remember when we asked that question of our teacher, the sister said, well, children, let's think this through. Aren't we told that heaven is that place where God will provide everything we need to be completely happy? Right? Well, if God knew that you would only be completely happy if you could enjoy the companionship of your beloved pet, wouldn't God provide that companionship? Well, even in first grade, I was learning to live in a nuanced spiritual tradition, that there might be a, 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 a definite sounding answer to a thing, but even after that, there might be some nuance, some room. And sometimes we were reminded that these things are a mystery. Sometimes you could be told, well, it's a mystery, as a way to kind of shut you up. You're asking too many questions. And I experienced that. But there were also other times where religious teachers or adults taught me that, well, here's what we think we know, but if we're really honest, we also remember that this is a mystery. And can we just live with mystery? I've seen it where one of the ways that people can try to move through life with a sense of peace is to understand and control things with their imagination, with law and order and facts, and in this case, catechisms or certitudes of different kinds. And I have many of them in my life. There are some certitudes that my religious tradition provides me with that I haven't any need to nuance. But then there are others where I do. I wonder if that's true of you, if you have come from a religious tradition, or if you sometimes operate with some sense of certitude about a thing, but then you also wonder about that certitude. I just think that's a pretty normal way of being, and I think it accords well with truth. The truth is, do we know for sure the ultimate fate of lots of different things, including the question of pets in heaven? I don't know. I do remember when Pope Francis was first elected, it was only in the first few months of his pontificate where there was the end of some formal talk or something, and I think about a 10-year-old Italian boy asked the Pope in the presence of an open microphone, what, my dog has died, will I see my dog in heaven? And Pope Francis said something like, heaven is large enough for all God's creatures. It made the news because people care about that kind of question and ask it. And then there was a kind of trying to walk back on the part of some spokespeople. He's not changing doctrine, so on. Well, that's just the way that stuff operates. So what happened to the cats? I don't know, because Lucille didn't tell us. My hope is that these beloved creatures find a way, or that God provides a way of their being. A lot of near-death experiencers talk about being greeted by beloved pets, and I don't have any problem with that. It's really God's business and not mine, in my opinion. Well, that's a little bit of compassionate response. what happens when people die? Well, I think there are a lot of things that happen, and that you and I, even if circumstances overwhelm us like they did Lucille, even then we still have options about how we respond to what's happening around us. And I really admired the way she responded. How does one stay in the present moment? Well, you might have to keep dragging your conscious awareness either from the past or from the future and making it sit still. And one of the ways to make it sit still is to make stillness a priority. I think it's best to do that early in the day. It can be the foundation of a day to sit in some stillness and just breathe. Maybe sit next to a plant. I like to be next to a green plant where it's throwing off toxic oxygen that you need, and you can throw off toxic carbon dioxide that it needs. That's one of my favorite ways to just be still. Try not to think of too much of anything, just be still. And then finally, the question of what happened to the cats? Well, I don't know, but I hope that that Lucille's love for her pets, if she wants to be with them, and I would imagine she does, that she has that opportunity. But for now, that's enough for this little podcast. We'll do part 3 in the next episode. That will be spiritual practice. I began to bleed into that a little bit with the meditation thing that I was just talking about, the breathing. But we'll go into more spiritual practices next time that might be of help to you that arise from Lucille's story. So for now, this is Father Nathan Castle. Thanks for being a part of this episode of The Joyful Friar. If you'd like to be in touch, contact me through the website, info@nathan-castle.com. God bless you. Have a great day.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can make a donation by clicking the donate button. See you next time. God bless.